In the battles and rapid marches, we somehow did not notice that autumn had already fully entered its rights. It got noticeably colder. The days became shorter and the nights longer. More often leaden clouds covered the horizon, and tedious, annoying rain drizzled. High in the sky, frightened, apparently by the roar of airplanes, squawking, flew flocks of cranes. At the end of September, the regiment's units approached the Dnieper and took up firing positions south of the village of Prokhorovka. On the same day it became known that our infantry managed to capture a bridgehead north of Kanev. By the unceasing rumble of battle we could assume that it was quite hot there. Our preparations for the crossing began. We all understood perfectly well that forcing such a huge water obstacle as the Dnieper is a difficult task. Therefore we prepared for its solution well in advance. Party meetings were held in the units. It was also held at our battery. Speeches of the participants were imbued with the desire to do everything in their power to honourably perform the task of the command. Our calculation by that time was, if I may say so in the veterans, all its numbers already had some combat experience. Maybe that's why the command entrusted us to be the first from the battery to cross to the right bank of the Dnieper. In the afternoon we checked the gun, personal weapons, shells, raft. We filled our duffel bags with ammunition, hand grenades, took dry rations for 2 days. We also prepared straps and ropes. Even at daylight we lay down to rest. Weary with the cares of the day, I also almost immediately fell asleep. "It's time, Nosov," the platoon commander gently touched my shoulder. It was as if the sleep had gone away. I looked around. Nearby, at the bottom of the trench, closely pressed against each other, were sleeping soldiers of the calculation. I got up from the straw that served as a bed. It was cool and damp. The night was dark, as if by order. A light rain was falling. "Wake up the guys," Junior Lieutenant Miniev said tiredly. It was felt that he had not slept a wink yet. The numbers of the calculation began to rise, to dismantle weapons, duffel bags. Alexei Bezobotnov was the first to get out of the trench, yawned sweetly and laughed quietly. "I didn't let you sleep through it, Sergeant. A good thing was coming up. I saw my wife." "Now Hitlerites will marry you," Nikolai Batyukov joked grimly, a newcomer fighter who arrived with the last replenishment. "You're wrong." Alexei Ivanovich didn't take his hint seriously. Now the fascists have no time for weddings. Ours are on the other bank. But the platoon commander strictly looked at Batyukov, shook his head reproachfully and softly commanded, "Follow me." We followed a narrow path that crossed a small grove. We stopped on the bank of the river in a thick willow tree. Here we were met by Lieutenant F.P. Shatilov. The rain stopped. It was heard how the waves with heavy ringing were beating against the shore edge and then rolled back with noise. Suddenly a mine rustled. A bright flash of bursting brought out of the darkness a sandbank and several rafts on which the soldiers were already loading the guns. Then another and another. The explosions rattled one after another for about 5 minutes. Fortunately, everything went safely. After the mortar fire had stopped, the battery commander questioned me about the order of operations. Our task was as follows: to cross the Dnieper, to take a firing position in the infantry fighting order and help them to hold the bridgehead. When the lieutenant was sure that everything was clear to me, he explained one last time. "The scouts on the other bank will meet you near Talberg's dacha." "What dacha? Why Talberg's dacha? And why a lonely, dilapidated house on the steep bank of the Dnieper, which I had noticed in the daytime, was called so, I could not find out either then or later. There was simply no time for clarification. The battery commander said goodbye to us. He shook each soldier's hand and wished him good luck in combat. The last to arrive was the driver Dektyarov. He stayed on the left bank. Pyotr Grigorievich shook my hand for a long time, said something incoherent, encouraging. But at last we took our places. The rowers took up the oars. The raft, swaying on the waves, slowly sailed towards the unknown. The homemade oars creaked quietly. The water murmured softly and soothingly between the logs. But my heart was still uneasy. We had hardly reached the middle of the river when we came under artillery fire. I can't say for sure whether the fascists noticed us or opened fire accidentally, just for insurance. But in any case we made trouble. We broke several rafts. Logs and planks floated on the water. Fountains of explosions were frequent and not far from our raft. Suddenly it rumbled very close to us. Splinters shrieked. Tight wave toppled me, threw Bondarenko and another rower into the water. Sevastianov was not confused, threw them the end of the rope. Bondarenko was pulled out with difficulty. The rower, unfortunately, could not be saved. He went down with a stone. The bastards christened him, spitting out water, cursed our shell man. He almost drowned. On such a river it's easy, said Batyukov. If you dive in, you're dead. At last the bursts were silent. We had to hurry. At my command the gunners came to the aid of the rowers. They swam faster, diving from one wave to another. The loose logs rubbed against each other, creaking menacingly. They picked up a fighter from one of the broken rafts. They let everyone go to the bottom, he said. Barely out of breath, I was the only one left of our crew. Overcoming the swift current of the river, the soldiers rowed as hard as they could. The shore appeared unexpectedly. At first the logs rustled on the sand, then a steep 5-sawn cliff loomed over us. We had to go downstream. At a relatively gentle place we moored. The crew quickly rolled the gun ashore, unloaded ammunition from the raft. Two with Batyukov went along the water's edge, illuminating themselves with a flashlight. Put out the light. There was an unexpected shout. Don't demask. Countrymen, show me the way, I asked the stranger hidden by darkness. Artillery, or what? A figure with an automatic rifle grew in front of us. That's right, Batyukov replied. Then everything is right. The petty officer ordered us to meet the artilleryman, said the machine gunner, and suddenly asked, could you lend me some tobacco for a twist, brothers? It's the second day without smoke. My ears are swollen. Nikolai reached into his pocket, took out a voluminous pouch and poured it out. So you want the road? With the same fighter we walked along the shore for another 200 meters. We stopped at a ravine. Here we clarified where to go. We ran back to the gun. The numbers piled up and rolled the cannon forward. The wet sand rustled under the wheels. Soon everyone was soaked. We had to throw off overcoats, cotton coats, helmets. We reached a ravine. We began to climb uphill. In the middle of the steep hill we were finally exhausted. What to do, Sergeant? Sevastianov looked at me. We can hardly overcome such a steep hill by our own forces. Maybe we should call the infantry for help. Batyukov suggested. Where will you find them now? After all, it's pitch black, Bez Zabotnov objected. Besides, she, my dear, has enough to do of her own. But I sent Nikolai Batyukov for help. We waited for a long time. It had already lightened up considerably. The road, bushes, and a steep bank began to be seen ahead. Are we stuck, gunners? Good-naturedly asked, approaching, a bearded brute with the epaulets of a petty officer. He went around the gun, quickly arranged the men who had come with him. Soon, by common efforts, the gun was rolled ashore. The infantryman helped us to carry the ammunition. Thanks, guys, I thanked the helpers. You can rely on the infantry, answered the petty officer for all of us. We won't let you down. And now you owe me a debt, Sergeant. Keep the fire burning in a difficult moment. We will, I promised briefly. We were alone again. The thick fog that had enveloped the shore began to clear. It was getting brighter. Ahead, about 300 meters away, the slopes of some height were visible. On the left there was an excellent landmark, a railroad bridge, which once connected the banks of the Dnieper. Now it was blown up. The supporting pillars are getting darker. The ends of the destroyed spans hang down into the water. The soldiers took a breath, took up the gun again. Rolled it to the crest of the height, passing the funnels and trenches. There in front of us, as if from under the ground, grew an officer in a cotton coat. In his right hand he held an automatic rifle. The left one was suspended at his chest on a dirty, bloody bandage. The officer clarified our task. We occupied a dilapidated trench with a crater in the middle. Well, we have less work to do. While the soldiers were preparing the position, I scrutinized the terrain. In front of us there was a gentle slope bumping into a gully. There's low stubble on it, and the gully is covered with bushes. Further on, there's a slope. On its crest, a small grove. Along the edge are enemy trenches. The distance is no more than a kilometre. On the left, in the gully, the village. Between the huts, gardens. Especially a lot of them on the southern edge of the village. And the mass of craters, darkening among the reddish stubble, was also conspicuous. We were in a hurry to finish the trench, but still we did not have time. Behind the grove rumbled. On the heights stood the frequency of explosions. For about 30 minutes the artillery bombardment lasted. Then the fascists went on the attack. Until late evening we with infantry repulsed the fierce onslaught of the enemy, and when finally his attacks stopped, the commander who met us in the morning came to us. He was no longer young, thin. His earth-coloured face was covered with thick stubble. Only inflamed eyes looked very lively and affectionate. "Thank you for your help, artilleryman." He warmly thanked the crew. "Without you we would today. Well, what can I say? Thank you again." And this was a high reward for us. In the middle of the next night, the rest of the battery crews crossed to the bridgehead. I reported to Lieutenant Shatelov about the events of the day. He began to question me meticulously about the nature of the terrain, about where our front line was, from what directions and in what numbers the enemy attacked us, how people behaved in battle, who of them distinguished themselves. Having listened to my answers, the commander apparently was satisfied. He lay down on the berm, looked long and carefully into the darkness of the night, occasionally illuminated by dead pale flashes of rockets. Soon junior lieutenants Maniev and Yudin, sergeants Rodionov, Simakov and Trukhanov gathered in our trench. Shatelov gave a combat order. In general outline it was as follows: to take firing positions on the slope of the height, facing the village Selishchi, and not to allow the Nazi tanks to break through to the Dnieper. Soldiers of the regiments began to prepare firing positions and alternately carry ammunition from the crossing. By dawn they had done it. The platoon commander allowed to rest. I lay down at the bottom of the trench and dozed off too. Comrade Sergeant Air Nikolai Batyukov leaned over me and shook me by the shoulder. By force of will I get up. My back aches, my legs feel leaden. It's already in full power of the weather autumn morning. Not a cloud on the horizon. As on the palm of my hand I can see the front edge and the buildings of the village. Only on the right, in the gully, still lazily swaying whitish tangles of fog, covering the shrubbery. I hear the distant hum of airplane engines. A group of airplanes is approaching from the west. The bombing was not over yet, as a hurricane artillery bombardment began. The height went up in smoke from bursts of shells and mines, and so it lasted for about 40 minutes. Then a deaf and distant, as if from under the ground, murmur of engines joined the rumble of explosions, and soon on the outskirts of Selish, on the edge of the grove, fascist tanks appeared. Among them were several massive, squat, with long gun barrels. I looked closer. So these are our old acquaintances' Tigers. Well, we beat them too. On my command, the numbers took their places on the gun platform. They act clearly, skillfully. The shell is already in the channel of the barrel. I stood to the right of the gun. From here it is more convenient to observe the enemy, the platoon commander, subordinates and neighbours. Once in a while I take a break from the binoculars, cast a glance at the crew, frozen in anticipation of the command. The gunner Vladimir Sevastyanov nestled into the panorama, stretching out his tanned neck. The rim of the white cuff collar shades the matte tan of his neck. Well done. He not only shaved, but even sewed a fresh collar. The fog in the ravine has already disappeared. Now the looming armoured hulks are clearly visible. In front of them stand frequent sultans of bursts long-range artillery from the left bank supports our units. But the tanks manoeuvre, without losses past the barrage zone. It is understandable, it is not so easy to hit a moving target from closed positions. Tanks descend into the gully and, tampering with bushes, crawl to the heights. The battery opens fire. Ringingly beat 76mm guns of Nikolai Rodionov, Fedor Simakov, Peter Trokhanov and ours. Vladimir Sevastianov all attention. Aims quickly, but without haste. With the third shell he stopped the Tiger. But at the same second a shell exploded at our gun. The numbers of the crew rushed to the ground. But Sevastianov was too late. He clutched his chest, fell down by the bed. Bezobotnov rushed to his aid. He took the wounded man on his shoulders and carried him to the shelter. For the gunner stood lock Nikolai Batyukov. The gun was silent for only a few seconds. In the meantime, the tanks were getting closer, and suddenly explosions rumbled under the two cars that had broken forward. We had hit a minefield. But what is it? The turret of one of the blown-up tanks began to turn slowly in our direction, shaking its barrel threateningly. Nikolai fired twice. The cross machine went up in flames. The others could not withstand our fire and began to retreat. When the battle subsided, Batyukov took out a kit set, tried to roll a cigar. But his fingers did not obey. Large drops of sweat appeared on his face. This first burnt tank was not easy for him. "Let me help you," Kolya Bondarenko offered understandingly. "Thank you," Batyukov smiled guiltily and handed him the unrolled cigarette. After a brief pause, the explosions rumbled again on the bridgehead. But now the enemy refused from a frontal attack on the height and concentrated all his efforts against our right flank infantry units. In this situation, the battery commander ordered me and Sergeant Trukhanov to turn the guns to the right and prepare to fire. And it turned out to be very timely, because soon one tank appeared from that side, followed by a second and a third one. Apparently, several enemy vehicles still managed to slip through the infantry orders and go to the flank of our battery. On the tanks, the first on the right, the second on the left, I heard the voice of the platoon commander and began to duplicate his commands. Nikolai Batyukov nestled into the panorama. One after another, 2 shots rang out. But the fascists did not stay in debt, opened fire with cannons and machine guns. Bullets and shrapnel rattled on the shield, carriage, beds. Fire. Fire. Junior Lieutenant Miniev hurried the calculations. The distance between us and the enemy machines is catastrophically shrinking, and Nikolai Batyukov cannot accurately point the gun at the target. And here, not having time to shoot for the third time, he grabbed his helmet with his hands and fell on the gun carriage. I quickly took the gunner's place myself. Now it is simply necessary the example of the commander is the key to success in battle. In the lens of the panorama undulating slope of the height and advancing tanks. Tiger broke out a little ahead of the rest of the vehicles, is already climbing a steep rise. Apparently wants to bypass the battery on the right. In my head it was clear, if possible, to aim at the side or at the caterpillar. I caught the chopped tank turret in the crosshairs. I pressed the trigger pedal. I was so tense that I didn't even hear the sound of the shot. But I clearly saw a hole in the side armor. The Tiger stopped. I shoot again. Now it's for insurance. Order, Commander. Peter Bondarenko shouted in an excited voice, noticing how the other 2 tanks began to crawl back behind the ridge. Taking advantage of the fact that the enemy armoured vehicles withdrew, and the battery with 2 guns repelled the infantry attack from the front, we put our position in order and helped the wounded Batyukov. Wow. Alexei Ivanovich even whistled in amazement, looking at his helmet. If it had been a centimetre lower, our Nikolai would have been dead. The jagged splinter really pierced the steel of the helmet almost at the rim and stuck in it. That's what saved our comrade. But still the blow was so strong that the locksmith lost consciousness for a while. And now, pale, with a bandaged head, he greedily sips water from a flask and, looking at me, begs, "May I, Comrade Sergeant?" "No. Go to the rear immediately." "I won't leave until I hit the tank." Batyukov suddenly stubborn. Our conversation was interrupted by a sudden roar of engines from behind and the loud voice of the battery commander. Tanks from the rear. Squads to battle. The soldiers rushed to the gun, Alexei Ivanovich picked up one bed, Batyukov the second, Bondarenko and I pushed on the barrel. We pressed with such force that, it seems, even the bones crunch. Still, it is not so easy to turn a ton of metal, though on wheels. Not with four of us. Clanking tracks, 2 tanks were coming at us. The same ones that had previously moved behind the ridge and now managed to bypass the height. I fell to the panorama. The optics brought the enemy vehicle so close that you could touch it with your hand. His heart raced, blood pounded in his temples. My nerves are stretched to the limit, but I keep waiting. And when the tank was 150 meters away, I pressed the trigger. The shot is accurate. The armored vehicle has stopped, and only its turret continues to turn in our direction. The impression is as if the tank, like a huge beast, blinded and now the trunk of the gun sniffing where his opponent. But I'm not waiting. Another shell pierces the armor. Flames erupt over the stern. The second tank, shooting back, begins to withdraw, trying to cover himself with the armor of his burning fellow. But here, the calculation of Senior Sergeant Fyodor Simakov differs. With the first shot, he stops this machine too. When we repulsed one more, already the third attack of the fascists, the dim autumn sun passed over noon. Its dim rays illuminated. Unfamiliar terrain, it had changed so much during these few hours of battle. The gentle slope of the heights was riddled with craters and strewn with tank tracks. Above the gully hangs thick brown smoke from the burning buildings of Selishch. Through its murky shroud, several tanks we hit, and the bushes torn by explosions are vaguely visible. We began to tidy up our firing position. And at that time Lieutenant Shatilov came to us in the course of the message. "Nosov, we have a chance to distinguish ourselves. You will be ambushed," he said with emphasized vigor, and ordered us to follow him. We rolled the gun after the combatant. Not easy to give us these 200 meters of descent. Once the heavy gun rolled down, dragging us with him. Savvy Bondarenko helped us out. He managed to lower the bed to the ground, to slow down. The ingenuity of the sheller saved us from injury, and the gun from damage. The anti-tank gun crew assigned to direct fire is usually given the main and additional sectors of fire. The main one on the probable direction of movement of tanks, additional to assist neighbouring guns. This time the battery commander deviated from the statutory rule, giving us only the general direction of fire. The new position was the worst: no view, no shelling. But when the lieutenant explained the task, its advantages became obvious. Moving towards the Dnieper, the fascist tanks would put their sides under the gunshots here, at the same time not being able to detect us soon in the narrow neck of the ravine. Leaving, the battery commander firmly said, "Stand to the last shell." Hardly had we prepared to fire, as on the height, now behind our back, again fell the enemy's fire attack. From the ravine we could not see what was being done in the front line, and the unknown in battle is always tiresome, stirring up nerves to the limit. I notice the numbers of the calculation look at each other, nervous. Leaving Bondarenko behind, I get out on the slope. Now the battlefield is like in the palm of my hand. Nazi tanks and infantry advancing from Selishche approached our front line, began to push the rifle units. I saw an armoured car crawling on the trench, began to turn around, levelling the ground. Another one hit an anti-tank gun and crushed it together with its crew. The death of people shocked. I had no more strength to watch. I went back to the squad, once again redistributed the duties. Alexei Ivanovich was appointed as a lock, Peter Bondarenko as a loader, and the wounded Nikolai Batyukov as a sheller. Fierce firing, shouts and rumble of tank engines were approaching with every minute. Suddenly 15 of our infantrymen rolled down into the ravine. Noticing us, they rejoiced. Cannon fighters. Well, with you, brothers, we won't be lost. We lay down on the slopes of the heights and began to hastily dig in. And we felt happier. We have cover now. Tanks appeared unexpectedly. First a thickened inflatable brake appeared from behind the cliff, then a gun barrel, and finally the whole steel giant crawled out. A ledge to the right of it was followed by a second and a third. They crawled along the valley, as flat as a table, giving us the sides. The position for shooting was the best, and one does not often find such a position in battle. I took careful aim and fired. The head tank stopped and went up in flames. 2 more shots and the second car caught fire. Our sudden fire made a stunning impression on the enemy. Coming behind the tanks slowed down, then stopped altogether. One of them, obviously still detected our gun, began to turn the turret. Flames burst from the barrel of its gun. A shell exploded behind us, the second one almost beside us. A blinding flash of explosion hit our eyes. A shell, Kolya. Bondarenko shouted behind me. I looked back. Batyukov was lying face down on the shell box. Pyotr Grigorievich rushed to him, turned him over, asked him something, then took a shell himself, loaded the gun. Another shot. The tanks moved away. When the murmur of their engines departed, I clearly heard the pounding of my own heart. Alexei Ivanovich was already busy dressing his wounded arm. Nikolai braced himself, only occasionally moaned quietly, biting his parched lips, but he refused to leave his comrades in arms again. The fascists, of course, did not leave us alone. They decided to destroy at any cost the gun that hindered the advance of their tanks. To the ravine moved a thick chain of their machine gunners. The infantrymen, positioned on the slopes, opened fire. The enemy soldiers lay down. But then short runs began to move forward again. The situation became more complicated. "Can we move back, Comrade Sergeant?" Uncertainly turned to me Bondarenko. "Did you hear the order of the battery commander?" I answered with a question to a question, and immediately ordered take the defence, prepare grenades. The numbers of the regiment quickly laid down together with the infantrymen, prepared for battle. Suddenly bullets whistled from the rear. There appeared another group of enemy soldiers. "Bypassed," shouted Bondarenko, and began hastily firing a machine gun. Of all the regimental commanders, with whom I was brought together by the front fate, especially remembered Major N.I. Ortinsky, slightly above average height, trim, with an intelligent, strong-willed face, Nikolai Ignatievich made a pleasant impression on people from the first meeting. Experienced, tactically competent commander, he was able to grasp all the twists and turns of the battle and at the right moment to influence its outcome by personal example. That day, being at his observation point, Major Ortinsky, as always, carefully watched the battle, and when he realized that the right flank batteries are threatened, he decided on the most extreme measure. Gathering the commanders and soldiers of the headquarters, he led them into the attack. With every minute, the ring of enemy machine gunners around the ravine was closing tighter and tighter. We had already prepared for a decisive fight, but it didn't come to hand combat. Suddenly the fascists began to retreat, then ran. From the crest of the height, with a shout of hurrah, our comrades in arms were approaching us. Helped us out. Joyfully smearing sweat or tears on his dirty face, Bondarenko moaned. "Forward, Nosov," ordered the regiment commander, having appeared near our position. Together with his comrades who came to our aid, the regiment rolled the gun out of the ravine and opened fire on the retreating fascists. By joint efforts of rifle units and artillerymen, the enemy was thrown back. Not a step back. "Passing from gun to gun," said meanwhile Nikolai Ignatievich. "We are now guardsmen, and the guards, as you know, never retreat." This was the first news that by the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief on September 29th, 1943, our brigade for courage and heroism in battles was named the 7th Guards Brigade. The regiment accordingly became the 321st Guards Regiment. Still a soul of a man is our commander. Looking after the major, expressed the general opinion of Alexei Ivanovich. Yes, for such a... Everyone perfectly understood what he wanted to say. Indeed, for his regimental commander we could go, as they say, in fire and water. That's why we rejoiced when later we learned that Major Nikolai Ignatievich Ortinsky was awarded the high title of Hero of the Soviet Union for forcing the Dnieper. WE somehow did not notice that the short autumn day had already burned out. The sun disappeared behind the horizon. A thick grey fog crept from the river into the ravine. It was noticeably fresher. The soldiers of the regiment climbed into the trench. Now it is possible to relax, to rest from nervous tension. The enemy, having been repulsed, was no longer active. Now there were only 3 of us left in the calculation. Nikolai Batyukov still had to be sent to the rear. He had lost too much blood and could hardly keep on his feet. Alexey Ivanovich leaned his back against the wall of the trench, closed his eyes. On his dusty face, even more clearly visible thick mesh of wrinkles and bitter folds in the corners of his mouth. I feel bad too. Tired. But here came Lieutenant Shatilov, congratulated on the successful fulfillment of the combat task and announced a commendation. The kind word of the battery commander cheered us up, seemed even to infuse us with new strength. The mood improved. The night came. One more front day passed in fire. I did not know then that the regiment command presented all the soldiers of my calculation to high governmental awards and me to the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, and that the scanty lines of the award sheet already summarized the results of our 3-month combat activity: 12 tanks, 2 destroyed bunkers and 6 dugouts, 2 destroyed guns and 8 machine guns. We exterminated up to 2 companies of enemy infantry. I open my eyes. From a narrow, deep slit I can see a piece of sky covered with clouds. A tedious autumn rain is falling. Having thrown off the cloak tent, which I used to cover myself with, I hardly get out of the cramped pile of sleeping soldiers. The uncomfortable lying down makes my back tingle, my legs tremble. Trying to stretch and warm up at least a little, I jumped, sat down several times. Then he went up to the gun emplacement. Observer Bezobotnov turned his cap and pulled it over his ears. He turned back at my footsteps, reported, "Everything's quiet, Commander. Only the weather is bad. In such weather, Hitlerites, as a rule, do not fight. Leaving on positions of duty machine gunners and observers, they also hide in shelters. Obviously, this is what was taken into account by our command, who planned in the first half of October offensive to expand the bridgehead. The night before, the battery commander gave us a combat order. From it became known that the rifle units in the morning go on the offensive and take possession of the village Selishchi. During the artillery preparation, our calculation is involved in direct fire, and during the offensive accompanies the infantry. During the night near the front line, we equipped a firing position, rolled the gun into the shelter. We placed ourselves in the crevices. Based on the experience gained at the Kursk Bulge, we dug 2 of them at once to the right and left of the gun platform. Meanwhile, the rain stopped. It became noticeably brighter, and at that time the first salvo rumbled behind the Dnieper. The artillery preparation began. Howling shells flew over us, raising a continuous wall of fire and smoke in the enemy's defense. With every minute the fire grew. Clouds of smoke covered the gully, hid the bushes. Our battery also opened fire. Giving commands, I simultaneously carefully observed the actions of the numbers. A few days ago, the calculation was replenished with newcomers. How will they behave in battle? My eyes linger on gunner Umar Hatzimudinov. Tall, in a protective coloured sweatshirt, tightly fitting his sturdy figure, the fighter seemed to merge with the gun. Acts clearly, confidently. It is felt that he knows his business quite well. And he has a lot of stamina. Artillery preparation lasted a little more than half an hour. Then the infantry came up to the attack and immediately began to push the enemy. We withdrew from the position and in our arms rolled the gun after it. Before Selishchi, a particularly fierce fight broke out. Katsimutinov and I got out to the heights, and the gun crew stayed in the hollow for the time being. We were observing. A cunningly camouflaged bunker suddenly opened fire in our sector. Apparently, until now the fascists did not detect themselves, so the bunker remained unharmed. But now it significantly complicated the actions of our infantry. At my command, the men of the regiment quickly rolled out the gun on direct aiming and opened fire. Especially confidently acted Lokh-Ivan Mikhailenko. Tall, black-haired, about 25 years old, he, like Katsimutinov, is characterized by calmness and coolness. The enemy's firing point is suppressed. The other guns of the battery are also firing accurately. Our infantry has already broken into the village. Recaptures house after house. It's time for us. We got to the western edge of the village. We took up a firing position in the garden. In front, about a kilometre from us, lay down in front of the heights of rifle units. The fascists had already managed to come to their senses. They put up stubborn resistance. On the bridgehead, day-by-day fighting is becoming more and more fierce. Then our units go on the offensive, seeking to seize the now populated Bobritsa. Then the enemy is trying to push us into the Dnieper. Reflecting enemy counterattacks, we do not leave our positions for days. This slushy night was also spent at the gun. We got wet, tired. At dawn, the platoon commander allowed us to have some rest in the dugout. I stayed at the position with Katsimutinov. I don't remember how long I slept, only woke up from the rumble of bursts and a loud command. Squads to the guns. I jumped out of the dugout first. It was already quite light. Jumping over puddles, I ran to the firing position. Behind me, breathing heavily, hurried the rest of the crew. The platoon commander and gunner were already firing at the tanks advancing from the forest. The battery commander appeared, ordered something to Junior Lieutenant Miniev. He, briefly answering "there is," jumped out of the trench and ran to the right flank. At this time the enemy began artillery fire. In the garden began to tear shells. Fragments crushed the trunks of trees, chopped branches. One of the bursts rumbled almost nearby. The earth fell from the walls of the gap. Another blow. There was a rattle of metal. The platoon leader was killed, shouted someone. Katsimutinov, Bondarepko, and I quickly got out of the gap. Under the bursting shells we crawled to the platoon commander. He was lying on the edge of the funnel. Blood was oozing from his temple. The soldiers on a trench coat dragged the junior lieutenant to the shelter, and I rushed to the firing position. Our gun was completely disfigured, the shield was bent, the anti-recoil device was broken, and the wheel was torn off. The battery commander caught me inspecting the gun. "Where is Miniev?" I'm silent. The death of the platoon commander, whom we all loved very much, so depressingly affected me that at the first minute even did not find what to answer. Shatilov and himself guessed everything. Rolled on his cheekbones tight jowls, but immediately pulled himself together, ordered. "Nosov, gather the men, follow me." On the mossy ground they climbed out to the heights. They lay down. The lieutenant personally set each horseless batteryman a task. It was reduced to one thing to become for a while an infantry cover for the surviving guns. The battle was rumbling on the right and growing with every minute. We hurried to adapt to the defence of the slopes of the height, but did not have time. Again began a fire attack of the enemy, and after the bursts of shells and mines the enemy infantry came to the height. And here our comrade Alexei Bezobotnov showed iron stamina and amazing fortitude. Acting as a machine gunner, he and his assistant let the fascists almost close and turned them into flight with accurate bursts. Hitlerites rained dozens of shells and mines on his position. Bezobotnov's arm was broken by a shrapnel. His partner was also seriously wounded. The machine gun was silent for a while. The fascists, having decided that the brave squad was finished, went to the height in full height. But here they were again met by cues. However, the enemy machine gunners, not paying attention to the losses, continued to climb forward, having decided to deal with the machine gunners after all. Alexei Ivanovich was wounded again, and again he did not leave his position. Bleeding, he kept firing until this enemy attack was smothered. When the enemy withdrew, Bondarenko and I crawled to our comrades. We saw bloody Bezobotnov is still at the Maxim in readiness at any minute to continue the fight. Nearby lay unconscious his partner. The height where the communist Alexei Ivanovich Bezobotnov made his feet, we began to call among ourselves Bezobotnovskaya. A few days later our regiment was removed from the bridgehead and transferred to another direction. Again marches. Behind remained Dyma, Radomishel Korostyshev and dozens of other settlements. ... The column crawls forward at the speed of a pedestrian. Every now and then the cars get stuck in the impenetrable mud. They have to be constantly pushed. It's difficult for everyone. But it's especially hard on the drivers. Take at least our Degtyarev. Having clutched the steering wheel with strained hands, he spins it almost every second. Heavy sweat runs down his gaunt face. There is no time even to wipe it off. All his attention is on the road. If it weren't for the war, he says tiredly, I wouldn't have agreed to go on such a trip for any money. It's not a road, but a punishment. After the war, one'll give up the wheel and go to build a highway. I wanted to say something else, but didn't have time. The tractor, like a boat on the waves, dived into another pothole. The engine howled, the wheels began to spin idly, splashing muddy sludge. Where did you go? Rebuked. Coming up to us, our new platoon Lieutenant Tarabrin. Clever boy. Everyone goes straight ahead, but you have to go into the pit. Degtyarev kept silent. Jumped out of the cabin. He opened the hood, started picking at the stalled engine. Fix it and catch up, Tarabrin said. We have no time to wait for you alone. The column moved on. The prospect of falling behind it did not please any of us, and then the commander of the battery arrived and asked unhappily, How long are we stuck? My driver shrugged his shoulders uncertainly. You should watch the Studebaker better, Degtyarev. After all, we were on vacation for 2 days. So it's a foreigner, he said with annoyance in his voice, raising his soiled face. Try to guess what will happen to it. You talk less and do more, said Lieutenant Shatilov. The battery commander was frowning, thinking about something. His concern was understandable. By the end of the day we should be already in Yoltsovka. And here was approaching evening, and the village is still at least 50 kilometers away. That's what, Sergeant, he turned to me. Hurry up and fix the car and catch up. You'll find us in Yoltsovka. We'll stand there until morning. He left. We were left alone in the open field. Degtyarev continued to pick at the engine without results. Yes, it turns out that we have stalled thoroughly, Mikhailenko said. Apparently this foreign thing is not adapted for our roads. It's a bit flimsy, Bondarenko supported it. It should only run on the highway. In the distance we heard the heavy noise of engines. With every minute it was growing, getting closer. Tanks, Sergeant, shouted the driver. Now I could see our 30 Checkers coming a little away from us. I rushed forward, shouted. The head car stopped. The hatch cover opened. A head in a ribbed tank helmet appeared from the turret. Why are you making noise? A bassy voice prophesied. Stuck. Yeah. And the engine's dead too. Give us a hand, brother. We'll be right there, agreed the tanker, jumping to the ground. He came up to me. Only I'm not a brother, Sergeant, but a lieutenant colonel. I apologized. Meanwhile, the 30 Quarter turned around. The soldiers of the calculation immediately attached a rope to it. The tank, roaring engine, easily pulled out of the puddle our tractor and dragged behind him. And one more luck, Degtyarev managed to start the car on the move. A few kilometers later, the tank column stopped at a fork in the road. Lieutenant Colonel called me. From the height of the turret hummed. To me straight ahead. You, Sergeant, where to? I answered. We unhooked the cable. The tanks passed by, giving us the acrid smell of burnt diesel fuel. We reached the village by midnight. At the outskirts of the village we caught up with our column. Despite the hour, women, old men and children were crowding around the cars. There were lively conversations. Quickly fortify yourselves, said the battery commander, and go on the road again. The situation had changed. But only we took the kettles, as we heard a command to get ready to move. We were hungry again, complained Mishchenko, climbing into the truck. And at that time the battery cook ran up to us and said in a displeased voice, Sit down, and I have to carry thermoses for you. Here, take these. The battery commander ordered to feed you personally. Don't be angry, father will give you the first tank we hit, joked Bondarenko. You can't make cutlets out of your tanks, replied the cook. Besides, I have enough iron of my own. The green light of a hand flashlight flashed from the lead vehicle. It was the signal to start moving. Bondarenko, the loader, now took the place of the exhausted driver behind the wheel of the tractor. Of course, he was not a great driver, but he drove quite well. And now the road was more decent, it was paved with rubble. And still it is good that in our calculation every number knows how to drive a car. In the middle of the night we were awakened by a sudden burst of firing and a loud command. Squads to battle. The soldiers instantly got out of the gap and rushed to the gun. I try to understand the situation. Dozens of missiles furrow the sky. In their greenish light in the distance blackens the edge of the forest. From there, machine guns and automatic rifles are beating. You can hear the heavy roar of tank engines. The day before, late December evening, the battery at full speed skipped a small village and drove to its outskirts. Further on the road winded along a slope descending to the river. On a rickety bridge we crossed it and climbed to a height. Here we took the defence. And now, right by the tanks, Sergeant, Katsimutinov reports. I stare in the direction he indicated until my eyes hurt. I don't see tanks. I only notice how in the night darkness their guns' shots sparkle with short lightning flashes. On the flashes of shots point. Lieutenant Tarabrin breathes hotly above my ear. Artillery firing at night is difficult, and especially on moving targets. Besides, the present composition of my calculation has no experience in this business at all. That's why Katsimudinov is now taking a long, very long time with aiming. Finally, he reports. Ready, Sergeant. Fire. The cannon threw out a sheaf of flame from the barrel. Another shot. Missed. But they've already found us. Fire trails pierce the night darkness, crossing, reaching for the gun, the sound of bullets and shrapnel hitting the shield. What can I say? The sensation is not pleasant. Two steel hulks, I can already distinguish them, are coming at us. They're no more than 200 meters away. A little more, and we'll be under the tracks. My soul is seized by a paralyzing fear, and not only for myself but also for my guys, for the gun. After all, we have just recently received it. At this moment, Bondarenko jumps out from behind the shield. He falls to the ground, crawls forward with a grenade in his hand. Stop. Get back. The soldier doesn't hear. He continues to crawl towards the formidable machines. One of the tanks slows down for a second. Flames spurted from the muzzle of its cannon, and at the same moment a terrible blow hit the corner of the shield, bent it like a piece of paper into a tube. Sparks spattered. Fortunately, no one was hit. Just a ringing in the ears. Joy. A Nazi tank suddenly burst into flames. Apparently one of the neighbours still managed to put a shell into its side. The same fate befell the second vehicle. In the meantime, the battle was becoming more and more fierce. The rumble of tanks, firing from guns and machine guns, shouts are heard on the right and on the left. Comrade Lieutenant, a liaison ran up to Tarabrin. The battery commander ordered to change the position, to move behind the river. The crew rolled the gun to the river. The bridge was already destroyed by shells. We stopped on the bank. In the glare of bursts in front of the glittering ice, and further in the middle, darkening water, climbing into the cold font is not particularly pleasant. I think for a minute what to do. "Why are you standing up?" shouts the platoon commander, appearing nearby. Having received no answer, he repeats, "What are you waiting for, Nosov?" "There's a river." "I see it's a river. Let's go." The squad takes up the gun again and rolls it into the river. The ice cracks threateningly, and now we're knee-deep in water. Tensing our strength, we try to overcome the river faster, but in the middle the right wheel gets into a sinkhole, and the cannon falls sideways. Soldiers with difficulty hold it. Now and then rockets are flying over the bank, mines are bursting deftly, bullets are whistling, driving us. Faster, faster. Tarabrin commands in a hoarse voice and also piles on the cannon. But it was as if it had grown to the bottom. Suddenly the moon appeared, illuminated the opposite shore. Several cars are slowly descending down the slope towards us. Among them there are frequent ruptures, but tractors stubbornly go to the water. It turns out that the Battery Sergeant Babitsky helped us out. As soon as he heard the shooting, on his own initiative led the vehicles to our firing positions. The soldiers quickly fixed the cable, and the tractor moved smoothly. "Let's go, my dear," Bondarenko wheezed, clenching his teeth. "Now we won't be lost." At last we got on dry land. Wet, dirty. Immediately we turned the gun and opened firing. January 1944 was snowy and blizzardy. But despite the difficulties created in these conditions, our troops continued to advance successfully. Our battery has not left the battles for more than 20 days. As milestones of the victorious way, the settlements of Maidan, Viznia, Pustomati were remembered. Early in the morning we approached the town of Polani, a quiet district centre, just liberated from the occupants. We had to stop at the outskirts of the town. The engine of our tractor was acting up again. While Dichdyarev and other soldiers of the calculation were engaged in repair, Lieutenant A.G. Tarabrin offered me to go with him to the elevator, in all probability a grandiose construction, as it was even listed on the topographic map. We went down a narrow street. Everywhere we could see traces of destruction, ruins of buildings, ashes, craters. Broken glass crunched underfoot. We came to the river that divides the village in two. The bridge is destroyed. The crossing is equipped directly on the ice. "What kind of river is this?" I asked the platoon leader. "Smotrich," he said. "From here to Shipivka is no more than 30 kilometers. There lived and worked Nikolai Ostrovsky." We all know that the platoon commander knows literature quite well. In his spare time he can talk for hours about writers, about the books written by them. And in special honor with him Nikolai Ostrovsky, the author of the immortal novel How the Steel Was Tempered. Afanasy Grigorievich reads whole pages from this work. Unfortunately, we did not manage to admire the elevator. Instead of it, we saw piles of ruins, among which wheat bunches were still smouldering. In addition to this failure, on the way back we were bombed. And although there were no more militarily important objects in the city, the Nazi pilots bombed the surviving residential quarters with stupid recklessness for a long time. As soon as the air raid was over, we hurried to the calculation. Here the sad news was waiting for us. Ivan Mikhailenko, the lockman, was killed, and Peter Dejyarev, the driver of the tractor, was wounded. How it all happened, my deputy Ahat Bagayev told us in detail. I heard airplanes buzzing. I immediately commanded take cover, and Mikhailenko laughs, take cover where you are, and then the bombs began to fall. Splinters whistled. Everyone lay down, and he and the driver continued to install the engine. Then it hit close by. Mikhailenko was killed, and Dejyarev was hit in the leg. Mikhailenko. And now, more than a decade later, he visibly stands before my eyes. His frontline fate was not easy. Just before the war, Ivan Savleyevich graduated from the regimental school, became a gun commander. With heavy battles, he withdrew from the western border. In the battles on the Don, was severely wounded, was taken prisoner. He managed to escape. In one of the farms, he, exhausted and half frozen, was sheltered by a family of patriots. He was cured. He started to make his way to the front. He was captured again. This time he was taken to the Gestapo. I prepared for death. I knew they don't get out of here so easily. But this time, too, the bony soldier was spared. He escaped by a miracle. After a long struggle, he crossed the front line. However, at the last meters he was unlucky again. He was blown up by a mine. He spent 6 long months in a hospital bed. After recovery with the next replenishment, joined our calculation on the right bank of the Dnieper. Zamkov. As a former gun commander, Ivan Savleyevich was many times stronger than me, both in theoretical knowledge and experience. But he never showed his superiority, and only sometimes politely and tactfully corrected me. And I was grateful to him for that. But now he was gone. A heavy loss. Peter Dejyarev was sent to the hospital by a hitchhiker, and Ivan Savleyevich Mikhailenko was buried here in Polonoi. Heights. How many of them there were on our way. And how many more there will be? The snow is waist deep, and we're changing one line after another. Having adopted the experience of the neighbouring battery, we put the guns on draggers. It's a simple device, and it's much easier to move a ton of cargo. The battery deployed in the ravine. On the right took the position of Sergeant Nikolai Rodionov, on the left the 2nd platoon. Ahead heard gun and machine gun fire, silently bursting mines. On the nearest ridge, with a control group positioned Lieutenant Shatilov. Obviously from his observation post he noticed some important target. At the firing position sounded a command. On the infantry grenade, fragmentation fuse, Site 200. The gunner Ahat Bagayev, who replaced Katsimudinov, who had been wounded in the December battles, was working quietly but quickly. Here, turning his broad, somewhat cheekbone face to me, he reports. The first is ready. The battery fired a volley. Apparently the shells were exactly on target, because immediately came another command. 5 shells, rapid fire. Soon Lieutenant Shatilov ordered to roll out the guns on direct aiming. We got to the height. Ahead, about a kilometre away, we could see the village of Svinoi. From its outskirts, slowly, with a fight, our infantry withdraws. From the village, suddenly appear several fascist tanks. Bypassing the Soviet infantry units lying in the snow, they are coming straight at us, at the height. They are firing from the get-go. That's why it is ineffective shells burst with underflight or overflight. Do not shoot. The battery commander warns us. Let's get closer. As soon as the tanks came to a nearby hillside, we opened fire. Around the steel boxes danced bursts, but they continued to advance stubbornly. And still soon the nerves of Hitler's tankers gave up. One machine caught fire, another spun with a torn caterpillar. The rest could not stand it, withdrew, opened fire from the village. The shells now burst with greater accuracy, showering our positions with a hail of shrapnel. Suddenly Ahat Bagayev yelped and pressed himself against the shield of the gun, then sat down on the snow. Volodya Kuzarman quickly bandaged his wounded arm. Bagayev stood up to the sight again. To my order to go to the infirmary, Ahat firmly replied, "I'm a communist, Commander. Should I leave the battle?" Until the evening he continued to fulfill his duties, and only when the gunfire subsided he went to the rear. Supported by our fire, the rifle units resumed the offensive. By evening they took Svinoi, and our way lay further to Shepetovka. A nameless height to the north of Shepetovka became the place of our stay for a long time. Here the advancing Soviet troops, having met stubborn resistance of Hitlerites, passed to defense. The measured, strictly regulated trench life began. At night the soldiers of the units improved their firing positions, and during the day they rested. In a few days they equipped communication passages and a dugout. We quickly made it habitable. Our skillful worker Konstantin Mishchenko even built a stove in it, the chimney from which led out into the ravine. We stoked it only at nightfall, observing the strictest camouflage. During the day the opening of the chimney was covered with a flap and covered with snow. One day in the early morning the snow-covered figure of a contact came into our dugout. The soldier stopped at the threshold, took off his helmet, knocked the snow off his boots, wiped his face. It is blizzarding. There is no escape. Both us and the fascists were swamped. Maybe it's for the best. What's the war like now? Positional. And you should quit strategizing, Pyotr Bondarenko stopped the talkative soldier. Tell me at once, why did you come here? Oh, motherfucker. I completely forgot. The battery commander urgently summons you, Sergeant the messenger addressed me. What a memory. I was shell-shocked in 40-second, and since then the balls have been spinning badly. I forget everything. Believe me, sometimes I can't remember my wife's name. Following the liaison, I reached the officer's dugout. Entered. Lieutenant Shatilov and platoon commanders greeted me affably. I looked at them with obvious bewilderment. What would this call mean? And then the battery commander ordered the telephonist on duty to urgently connect me with the regimental headquarters. I picked up the phone, reported. In response, I heard the muffled voice of the deputy commander. "Nosov, dear. On behalf of the command, heartily congratulate." And at the same moment something rattled in the receiver, there was a squeak, crackle, and the voice of the speaker disappeared. We had to wait a few minutes. "Well?" Lieutenant Tarabrin asked. The deputy commander started to congratulate me on something. I answered confusedly, and then the connection was cut off. Fortunately, the phone came back to life. "Nosov, can you hear me? I congratulate you on being awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union." The surprise made me even more confused. I couldn't even find anything to say to the deputy. Took the receiver away, looked at it disbelievingly, even frightened. "What happened?" Worried battery commander. "Major congratulated on the promotion. Petty officer or junior lieutenant?" asked someone from the audience. "No, Hero of the Soviet Union." "Hero." Lieutenant Shatilov stood at attention, shook my hand, warmly and heartily congratulated me. After that, all day long familiar and unfamiliar soldiers, sergeants and officers came to our dugout. From their friendly and comradely congratulations it was light and joyful on the soul. In early March our regiment was withdrawn from the battle. The units were stationed in a pine forest in the vicinity of the town of Slavuta, and only here we really noticed that spring had already come. The days became longer and the nights shorter. The sun was baking. The snow was settling on the fields, loosening. The odours of tree resin and moisture made me dizzy. Soon there was a regimental party meeting. Communists discussed their tasks for the upcoming generalization of combat experience and improve the training of personnel. "The enemy is still strong," emphasized in his speech our new deputy commander of the regiment on the political part of Marj, Siplakov, so in order to finally defeat him, we need to tirelessly, every day to improve the combat skill of artillerymen. And we studied. Much attention was paid, for example, to shooting at moving targets at night. The experience of the December battles of the past year urgently required it. In a word, for a month of training we thoroughly replenished our knowledge and practical skills, had a good rest. April 1st, the battery met already on the march. The ground was darkening on the fields. Only in the ravines and gullies still grey loose, water-soaked snow deposits, and near them, on steep hills and hills, the first grass was greening up. In the afternoon, the wet snow suddenly fell, and a blizzard began. In the lowlands drifted snowdrifts again. We could hardly push the slipping tractors along the muddy road, and by night the frost hit. The road was covered with ice crust. It became even more difficult to move. For 5 days of march, they covered only 250 kilometers. We arrived near Ternopil, and here it began. We were transferred from one section to another. At dawn, we concentrated on the edge of some grove. Senior Lieutenant F.P. Shatilov pointed the gun commanders to a flat height with a small farm on top. They were to take firing positions. The crews rolled the guns to the height right on the plough. It was a hellish labour. Pudgy clods of mud were sticking to the boots and wheels. While we got out on the hill, we were completely exhausted. Our uniforms and even our cotton coats were wrung out. We stopped near the farm buildings next to the road. The commander of the battery indicated the places where the guns were placed. We started to entrench. The fog gradually cleared. The outlines of local objects became clearer and clearer, ahead of the field. Further a gully, and behind it a height, overgrown with small woods. Lieutenant Tarabrin approached. Afanasy Grigorievich was obviously depressed about something. In a sluggish, indifferent voice he specified the task. Then sat down on the bed, smoked. Observing our work, he constantly wrapped his gaunt face in the raised collar of his overcoat. Isn't he sick, I thought. At last the spring sun peeped through and began to warm up. Behind the gully there was another height with a sparse grove. As far as I knew, other batteries of our regiment were defending on it. Suddenly explosions went off there. Every minute they became more and more. Smoke covered the horizon. It was the first to take the enemy strike calculations of the 4th Battery. It should be said that this unit was unlucky in the morning. When changing firing positions, it was suddenly shelled by the enemy. Wounded were the battery commander Captain N. Savinov, the commander of the calculation hero of the Soviet Union, Sergeant Mikhail Nikonoroff, Sergeant A. Pererva, and Private V. Krivonos. But even more severe tests fell on the battery with the beginning of this battle. 2 of its guns were smashed by enemy artillery fire. Many artillerymen were wounded. And among them, for the second time, Mikhail Nikonoroff. In a serious condition, he was sent to the hospital. And after the artillery raid on the positions of the 4th Battery went at once more than 20 Nazi tanks accompanied by machine gunners. In an unequal fight with them entered only 2 remaining intact guns. But even with such forces, the Soviet soldiers repelled this first attack. The new barrage of artillery fire fell on the height. Shells and mines ploughed over here, it seemed, every metre of ground. In such an inferno there could hardly be anything alive. So, in any case, Hitlerites thought. That's why they went to the second attack fearlessly, in full height. And again they came under the devastating fire of the same 2 guns. In this battle, the calculation of Sergeant Pasinkov showed boundless courage and firmness. Having ordered the other numbers to cut off the enemy infantry from the tanks with small arms, Pasinkov, only 2 with gunner Novikov, was firing from the gun. 5 armoured vehicles were coming at their position at once. Having waited until the first of them approached only 300 metres, the sergeant fired. 1 tank caught fire. The next shell knocked out the second vehicle. The accurate fire caused confusion in the ranks of the enemy. Hitlerites withdrew. But the unequal fight did not end there. After the next artillery attack on Pasinkov's calculation again went tanks, and again 2 of them were burned. However, the Soviet artillerymen also suffered losses. All the numbers, except for the sergeant and gunner, were out of action, and the explosion of a shell knocked off the wheel of the gun and damaged the panorama. The gun was silent for some time. And then the enemy tank moved on it at full speed. But it didn't make it. Pasinkov and Novikov by inhuman efforts managed to lift the gun, to put shell boxes under the carriage, and to make a shot. He was a sniper. Ahead on the height where the 4th Battery was fighting, the battle was still rumbling. And we, having thrown off overcoats and cotton coats, continued to hastily prepare gun emplacements and slots. From time to time I took a break from work and, having raised binoculars to my eyes, looked in the direction of the heights boiling in the ruptures. Soon I saw how, shooting back, small groups of our infantry began to retreat to the right and left of it. And from behind, a distant hillock Nazi tanks and machine gunners were moving to their rear. The enemy was about to cut off the Soviet infantry units' escape routes. Battery, on the fascist tanks, Senior Lieutenant F.P. Shatilov started to command. He, with the control group, was in the trench, just to the right and ahead of the firing position of our calculation. It flashed through my mind the senior lieutenant had deliberately chosen an observation post here, in full view of his subordinates, in a tank-prone direction. Here it is, the personal example of the commander in a difficult situation. Our volleys only temporarily delayed the advance of tanks with white crosses on their sides. But even this hiccup of the enemy was enough for the retreating infantrymen had time to cross the gully, then quickly entrench on a new line and stop the advance of the machine gunners. However, the respite did not last long. After furious artillery preparation, Hitlerites again went forward. Fascinated by the battle, neither we nor the battery commander did not find out in time that to the right of the height up to 10 fascist tanks with machine gunners broke through the infantry cover and are already flanking our positions. Tanks on the right. Lieutenant Tarabrin was the first to recognize the danger. My crew quickly turned the gun and opened fire. I did not notice where our first shell hit, but only the paratroopers from the lead vehicle, as if blown away by the wind. Well, that's a good start. What's that? Suddenly Sergeant Denisov's gun went silent. Did the guys die? That's where the platoon commander went. I can't see what's happening on the right. I can only hear tank engines roaring. The situation is getting more complicated by the minute. The enemy is already pushing our rifle units again, bypassing the height. At this moment, wounded Senior Lieutenant Shatilov appears at the position. He is supported by 2 soldiers. Nosov, he commands. Change your position behind the river. Call the tractor, I order Mishchenko. The loader signals our new driver, Sergei Medyansky. He takes the car out of hiding and at full speed rushes to us. And suddenly, before my eyes, the back of the truck burst into flames, and at the same moment the ammunition detonated. The explosion scattered boxes, boards. The mutilated Studebaker went up in flames. At my command, the numbers rolled the gun on their hands. Soon 2 soldiers from Sergeant Denisov's calculation caught up with us. They were carrying the body of the dead Lieutenant Tarabrin. From their hurried story, the picture of the last minutes of the life of this courageous officer emerged in general outline. When the platoon commander ran up to the silenced gun, from Denisov's calculation only 2 of them were alive. They were wounded, stunned and covered with earth. The lieutenant helped them to get out and immediately stood at the site, loaded the gun, fired. Then twice more. One of the enemy vehicles went up in flames, the others began to retreat. But then a mine exploded near the gun. A fragment pierced the platoon commander's chest. I don't know whether the inscription Lieutenant Tarabrina's height appeared on the headquarters map, but we, the soldiers and the battery commanders, from then on called it so. Once nameless, with a small hamlet on the top. But that will be later. In the meantime, we roll the gun to the river to take a new firing position on its opposite bank, as ordered by Shatilov. Together with us, the rifle units, which had been thinned out in the battle, are retreating. The fascists press, and suddenly their tanks begin to turn back in a hurry. What's the matter? We look around perplexed, and a burning joy fills our hearts. From the forest ahead of us, our powerful KVS come out and quickly turn in the battle line. So at the sight of whom the Hitlerites turned back. It was July, the middle of summer. There are weatherful, sultry days. Unploughed fields are lushly overgrown with weeds. Grass has grown up to the waist in the ravines. On our part of the front, there was a lull for the 3rd month. At first, the battery took up firing positions near Kodochkova. And now we've been taken here, deep in the defence. We're located on the edge of the forest. We're frankly bored without a real job. In the evenings, we talk about the situation at the fronts. Everyone is happy about our successes in Belorussia. There, the Soviet armies have already released Minsk. Brest came to the border of the Soviet Union. And how many kilometers to the border? Pestered Alexei Nikiforov from our new platoon commander. To Lvov, 50 kilometers, joked the one, and there 1 hour to go by Studebaker. In short, we are waiting for our time, and as it seems, it is not far off. At night there is a lively movement of troops. On the forest road to the front line are columns of infantry, artillery, and behind us rumbling engines, concentrate tanks. Everything began in the early morning of July 14th. First, the enemy defence was thoroughly worked by our heavy artillery. After her bomber aviation struck. Only after that the infantry and tanks moved forward. The fascists, dumbfounded by our powerful artillery and bombing strikes, at first gave no signs of life. But then their artillery started talking. At the edge of the grove where we were stationed, shells began to burst. The chilling whistle of the shells pressed us to the ground. Near the gun struck a deafening bang. Expecting an explosion, the soldiers were numb. But for some reason there was no explosion. Noticing the hiccup, the platoon commander ran up. I reported what was going on. He, warily looking at the round, tea-saucer-sized hole in the ground, ordered to roll the gun. It's not like sitting on a powder keg while firing. Blessed be our God. Sergeant Bondarenko barely got out of his naughty lips as we moved the gun to a safe place. I looked at my comrade and noticed on his temple a white strand of hair on his temple. It must have been terrifying seconds for Pyotr Grigorievich, being near the unexploded shell. For 2 hours we were firing intensively at the enemy. Memory has not kept the number of shells we fired, but I know one thing for sure: the paint on the barrel of the gun then turned red and shriveled. Soon we dismounted, and after the commander's car moved forward. Our tractor is again led by Pyotr Degcharov, who just before the offensive returned from the hospital. We approach the front edge of the former enemy defences. Everywhere we can see traces of destruction, ruined trenches, dugouts. We met the first group of prisoners. They are wandering with a dumb expression on their faces. These have fought back, Alexei Nikiforov says with conviction. Our rifle units, overcoming the increasing resistance of the enemy, slowly moving forward, in their battle orders, and we move from line to line. Here our infantry lay down in front of the embankment of the railroad. Shells are bursting in its order. At my command, the calculation quickly rolls out the gun on the heights. I began to look closely from where the fascist cannon was beating. And at that moment a line of tracer bullets shows me a firing point. It's a gun in a concrete viaduct, thanks to the unknown assistant machine gunner. Reference point 2, left 20 gun, I command the gunner, armor piercing. The first shell crushes a block of brick and concrete. Another shot. You can see how the fascist calculation is running away from the wrecked gun. We send them back a couple more fragmentation shells. Meticulously fire and other calculations of the battery. One after another silence enemy firing points. Infantrymen rise to their full height and hide behind the embankment. The battery fourth day on the march. We almost do not close our eyes. Before dawn we stopped on a hillock. Degcharov came out of the cabin to stretch. I stayed where I was and almost immediately dozed off. I woke up to someone shaking me by the shoulder. Ivan! Nosov, is it you? Wake up. I opened my slipping eyelids with difficulty and I couldn't believe my eyes. At the cabin door stood my childhood friend Anatoly Bubnov, also a sergeant, tall, straight, with the Order of Glory on his broad chest. Immediately jumped out of the cabin, hugged my fellow countrymen. And some forgotten pictures from my childhood memory came back. My native village Kochnevo in Vladimir region, rural school and our teacher Anna Ivanovna. Anatoly and I are sitting on the first desk and diligently writing out still rusty letters. How did you find me? I asked the first thing that came to mind. Just like that. I was coming from the front line. I see guns. The cars have anti-tank diamonds on them. Let me, I think, ask about my fellow countrymen from Vladimir. Yes, they say. Ivan Nosov, is that you? And where is this Nosov in the car, taking a nap? It didn't take long to talk to a fellow villager. The commander's order led our column forward. In farewell, Anatoly, shaking hands, said, "We'll meet in Berlin." We did not know then that neither he nor I would reach the capital of the Nazi Reich. My fellow countryman and childhood friend artillery scout Sergeant Bubnov died a hero's death in August in Lvov region when repelling an enemy tank attack. And me. I didn't make it to Berlin for another reason. The regimental column is slowly moving forward. On the right and left we hear the silent rumble of battle. It's as if we're walking through a narrow corridor of fire. And indeed we are. The warm summer rain that had been drizzling since morning had stopped. From behind thinning clouds the sun looked out, illuminated the hilly field and the nearby forest, into which the head of the column was drawn. Here, pressed against the trees, the vehicles stopped. The soldiers began to jump out of the bodies, warming up. I also jumped out of the cabin, went out on the road, and at that time 2 fascist bombers passed low over us. Explosions rumbled. I did not have time to understand anything, as I felt that something heavy knocked on my right hand. It instantly became alien. He grabbed his elbow, his fingers stained with blood. Wounded flashed in his head. He rushed to the nearest crater, but he had no time to jump into it. He felt another blow, now in the back. I could hear the rumble of enemy planes moving away. Soldiers of my calculation ran up to me, picked me up under the arms and led me to the car. The regiment commander came up and ordered. An instructor and my car. The commander's all-terrain vehicle arrived. I was bandaged, then carefully sat down next to the driver. A paramedic and an orderly took the back seat. The car started. With a heavy feeling I left my comrades in arms, with whom for so long I shared equally the bitterness of failures and the joy of victories. I wanted to believe that I would come back to them. I couldn't. Until late fall I was in the hospital, and when I was cured I asked to go to the front, to my unit. But the command decided otherwise. I was sent to a military school. After the war, one learned that our regiment fought through Poland, East Germany, and finished its fighting way in Prague, the capital of Czechoslovakia. It was a pity that it was already without me. One consolation was that I always carried the images of my fellow soldiers in my heart. And I was to some extent also involved in their heroic deeds,